Before policy debates or ideological divides, early American politics was an unorganized tangle of loose alliances. Martin Van Buren looked at that chaos and built a machine to control it. Born in Kinderhook, New York in 1782, Van Buren entered a political arena driven by informal factions and regional interests. Politicians of the era relied largely on personal reputation and local fame to gather national support. He realized these fragile coalitions naturally dissolved between election cycles. To maintain national power across decades, a leader needed a permanent, disciplined structure that functioned regardless of individual personalities. As this diagram illustrates, Van Buren pulled scattered regional factions into a unified grid. He connected local committees, state conventions, and loyal newspapers into a single network. The result was the Democratic Party, the world's first mass participatory political organization. He took the presidency out of the parlor rooms of the elite and turned the campaign process into a managed, systemic operation designed for a single purpose: winning. Van Buren attached his new political engine to a popular figurehead, Andrew Jackson. Serving as Jackson's vice president, Van Buren harnessed the general's majoritarian appeal to fuel the Democratic Party's momentum. When Jackson's second term ended, Van Buren used the very party apparatus he designed to secure his own election to the presidency in 1836. His victory validated his design for the acquisition of power. But the techniques required to manage an electorate proved separate from the skills needed to stabilize a national economy. How does the man who standardized the winning of elections lose his grip on the country and watch his single term unravel? On March 4, 1837, Martin Van Buren took the oath of office, inheriting the full weight of Jacksonian executive authority. Here is his economic inheritance. Andrew Jackson had waged a bitter war, fracturing the central vault of American finance. Federal deposits spilled into dozens of unregulated state banks, which quickly inflated the economy by printing paper money. Just weeks into Van Buren's term, that speculative bubble burst, triggering the Panic of 1837. Credit vanished. Citizens rushed to withdraw physical gold and silver. The banks lacked. Businesses shuttered, leaving thousands destitute, relying on pawnbrokers to survive. Meanwhile, strict federal mandates required public land be purchased with hard specie, draining currency from local markets. The political operation Van Buren built to win elections could not print money, employ workers, or reopen banks. Standing against a macroeconomic disaster of this unprecedented scale, the great architect of the Democratic Party was completely powerless. By the election of 1840, the economic depression had suffocated the country for 3 years. The opposition Whig Party spent that time methodically organizing to turn the financial ruin against the president. The Whigs recognized they could not beat Van Buren with disjointed factions. They adopted his specific tactics, utilizing the same local committee structures and mass messaging strategies that Van Buren himself had introduced. They nominated William Henry Harrison. Harrison was a wealthy elite, but the Whig campaign machine rebranded him, packaging their candidate as a humble, frontier everyman who plowed his own fields. The party flooded the country with unified campaign materials depicting Harrison sitting outside a log cabin, drinking hard cider. They juxtaposed this image of rustic simplicity against Van Buren, painting the incumbent as an out-of-touch aristocrat while the country starved. The strategy worked, and Harrison won in a landslide. The mass participatory party system Van Buren built and matured was adopted by the opposition and ultimately ended his own presidency. With his political capital exhausted by the Depression, Van Buren's single term came to a close. He retreated from national power, eventually moving back into a quiet estate in his hometown of Kinderhook, New York. He lived there until 1862. In his final decades, he watched the nation solidify into the organized, two-party arena he had engineered. The Panic of 1837 ensured he would only serve one term in the White House. But his structural redesign of American politics outlasted the crisis, replacing the informal, elite politics of the early republic with the disciplined mass party model that defined the next century of American power.